Now, one of you asked about the sound of R in modern Irish, or perhaps modern Gaelic more broadly. To try and get this done before midnight, I'm going to have to fly through this, so apologies in advance. The first thing, Cadas R aun. What is an R? Without going into too much detail now, it might actually be better to say that R is defined by its phonotaxis. Phono meaning sound, taxis related to the word touch, tactile, as in basically what sounds it can touch or what sounds it can be beside. Or basically is any sound that isn't an L that can go after a stop, like put a k, but a g, or after a fricative, f, th, h, whatever, v, th, r. That's what erotic is. We should actually speak about maybe the R position rather than the R sound. But anyway, that doesn't need to detain us too much. Now, before I begin talking about R's, because there are many R's in the world, I'd like to say a brief word about what is called phonation. Basically, what position your larynx or your vocal cords, often called vocal cords, but vocal folds would be a more accurate term. To give you a very rough guide, there are more than this. There's, of course, anything that exists along a spectrum has infinite points, but if we just mark off 5 points on the spectrum of phonation, so what can your larynx do to make sound? So glottis, now the glottis, I hate that word. Perhaps barn fiabawin, that would be a better word. So basically, when the gap in your windpipe is fully open, or it's fully closed. Sorry, lawn dunto. That's a glottal stop, as an or the way that a lot of Irish learners make the mistake of saying something like her donkey, pronouncing it, or his donkey, and would say ossel, or if they were calling someone called Anya, if they used the vocative particle at all, they might say Anya. That glottal stop doesn't exist in Irish, but that's what a glottal stop is. It's when the glottis fully closes. The next point along the spectrum, glottis le bug ronte, but or partially closed. I know these are awkward terms, but look, I only threw these notes together, try and get this done before midnight. Is breathy voice. So since we're talking about R, we might as well use an R sound, one of the many R sounds. The one common in English. We'll go from what you know first. So, well, can I do it? That's the closest that I could do to a breathy voiced R. When the glottis is cyclically opening and closing, what's called the Bernoulli effect. You can go up and read about it. It's what makes planes fly. That's normally called voiced. But of course, voice can be breathy voice, creaky voice, whatever. So this is often specified as modal voice, but normally when people say voiced, this is what they mean. This is what the position of the larynx is in, or this is the position of the larynx. Then when the glottis is, when it is, almost fully open, you get what's called creaky voice, or what the Americans call vocal fry, or sometimes called laryngealization, but I don't like that term. Creaky voice is fine and descriptive. So a creaky voiced R would be and then when the glottis is fully open, that's basically what a H is. You can't even hear it, it's unvoiced. So for example, an unvoiced R would be notice that I have a fricative R there anyway, but anyway. Now, just to show you the different kinds of R's that exist, and perhaps the different kinds of R's that people from different parts of the world might be inclined to pronounce and then carry over into a second language as a mispronunciation. So for example, you get what's called a roll or a trill, the Coronal, or rolls and trills tend to be with the flappy, floppy parts of the body. So usually the lips, brrr, you can bilabial trill, or the tongue, rrr, or the back of the tongue. But anyway, in Scotland, for example, and I thought it'd be a bit of fun to maybe throw the cat amongst the pigeons with an English spelling reform, which I'm also very interested in, and have been for a long time. So, for example, the rolls trilled Coronal or tongue front R in Scotland. The round and round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. Now, speaking of voicing, you could have the exact same trilled R. This is presumed to have a modal voice, but the Welsh R, as in Welsh RH, although this doesn't carry over as far as I know into English, they're voiceless R, so it's the same body parts except that the glottis, the vocal folds, are fully apart. So you'd get round and round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. That's not the way a Welsh person would actually say it, as far as I'm aware, or any Welsh person would say it. Now, you also have a tapped R. This is the R that people tend to find difficult. I have tapped R's in my English, amongst other R's here, actually. But this is the R that people tend to mispronounce. So, for example, like in the word or, the word for gold in Irish, or is just a single tap. Another way to transcribe it, and what I often tell people to do, think of it as a very short, as a very short D. Ode, or people often give the example Prince of Prussia as a way of getting to it. But anyway, so for example, if I pronounce this with the tapped R as in Ireland Irish, when I say something I'll talk about in future videos, when I say Irish English, what I mean is the English spoken as influenced by the Irish language, and to use the word Hiberno English or something a bit more foreign and distant to refer to the kind of English that I'm speaking now, which isn't Irish English, I would say, because it's not particularly. This is Irish English, but the way that I'm talking now is Irish English, but what I'm talking now, I would perhaps describe as Hiberno English, but I'll talk about that distinction in a future video. Sorry, I'm rushing out to get this done. There's loads to talk about. So, tapped R. Round and round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. Tapped. Now, a sound even more difficult for learners of Irish to try and pronounce is the Slender R. This I isn't a vowel in itself. It's not what you would call a sound vowel. It's just a symbol to show that the following consonant is slender. In my own radical spelling reform, I would actually represent it by a tailed I, nowadays known as a J, to represent the vowel that used to be there that caused the R to be slender or palatal in the first place. Ode. And there are different variations of that slender R sound amongst native speakers. Sometimes as a tap, sometimes as a fricative. Here I'll try to use the tapped one. So, round and round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. That's the slender R at the start of a word. Then in the Ireland, England Saxons, commonly known as the English and the Irish more broadly, which is this R now, round and round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. So that this typical English R is one of the kind of R's that I have in my English. I tend to have what I think, if I'm not mistaken, well, actually, it might be hard to say, that might be in free variation, but I tend to have this at the start of words, tapped R's between vowels, and I tend to have a fricative voiceless R at the end of words. But anyway, so a lot of the older accents in the towns and cities, what people usually ascribe to, most of the accents in the towns and cities in Ireland come from the accents of the invading English centuries ago. They have nothing to do with Irish. They're Ireland Saxon accents, if you like, not Irish accents. By Irish, I mean Gaelic. So like you might hear in Cork City or Limerick or a lot of the smaller towns in the west of Ireland. Round and round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. This R. Then the American Saxons. This symbol is often, you might see it sometimes to try and intimidate people, to, or perhaps more narrowly describe the R sound of found in some dialects of American English. This is a shorthand, centralized approximant. So, for example, round and round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. What's often called a bunched R, or a molar R. You'll often hear it being described as a retroflexive R. I might have called it that myself in the past, still sometimes do. But it's not actually a retroflexive R. There's retroflexive R is the R of found in Indian English. Round and round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. And then you also have this England Saxon, this wo. So people often say, oh, he pronounces his R's like W's. That's not actually quite true, because W is a bilabial approximant, using both the lips, bilabial. Whereas this sound is actually a labiodental approximant. It's the V sound found in Finnish, for example. Round and round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. That's this V. And there are loads of other kinds of R's. You've this Czech palatal trill, which might have been the same sound as slender strong R in Old Irish. I'm not familiar enough with Czech accents to do a good impression, so I'll just do my normal accent, but with a trilled palatal R. So round and round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. There's some variation there in voicing, but we'll ignore that. Now, you also have what's often called a French R, but in France there are many different kinds of R. Some of the more noble French still maintain this tapped R. They tend to live in the countryside. But you get this uvular, as in the uvula means the little grape in Latin. It's that thing that hangs down at the back of your mouth. And that is this R, if I have the correct shortcut set up. I do. So round and round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. That's a trill, it's continuable, but you also get a uvular fricative, which you actually do find in, for example, Dundalk, a lot of Wexford, a lot of the older, especially in Eastern Ireland. This was possibly one of the, again, it's an urban sound, so it was probably in the English that was brought by the invaders to the towns. So, for example, round and round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. You hear that? Find that in Wexford and places like that in the east of Ireland. Now, that's a fairly quick summary of different R sounds. But, for example, when if I replaced any of those R's with the other, you wouldn't think that I'm saying a different word. It's not phonemic. They're all what you might just call color sounds. They just change the color or the accent of the word, but not the meaning. So that they're not phonemes. What I might actually rather call, more understandably, meaning sounds or word meaning sounds. But it's important to, at least to have an idea that the world is more complicated than we would possibly like it to be. That there are loads of R sounds, and the mistake that Ireland Saxons or Ireland Saxonized people tend to make when they're trying to learn Irish, they never actually learn the native Irish sounds. They only use their English or any of these variations. Country people, of course, still tend to have a tapped R. I have a tapped R myself. and you find it in certain town accents as well. That's much that is the Irish sound when it's broad, but unfortunately the slender R, or ru, as in round and round, the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. That sound is, interestingly, that is always the first sound to disappear, and that doesn't carry over into English actually. That even in what I would call Irish English, as in Gaelic English, that sound doesn't carry through. And when you get a weak native speaker of Irish, they tend not to have slender R. It's the first sound that goes. So there's a summary there. I won't delay now, but now let's push on to this, because this is interesting. Now let me set that up there properly there again for a second. So every single letter in Irish has 4 different forms, with the exception of H. But anyway. So here, for example, you have a slender palatal, unlenited or non-softened R. This sound doesn't exist. Well, really, there are. It doesn't exist phonemically anymore in Gaelic. In Ireland or Scotland or Man. But it does exist phonetically actually, but that's a different story. So this is what I would say in Old Irish. So, for example, at the start of the word for king, would have been in very early Old Gaelic, ri. Now, what has happened in all dialects is that this slender, this palatal trill, ri, has become broad first of all. Ri. But what has happened in most dialects outside of Ulster, and with the exception actually, this seems to have survived in Roscommon and kind of up along Eastern Connacht, which are now all dead, but worth reviving, aren't they? We'll talk about that. That this, the strong broad R, this rolled R, or velarized R, has for the most part of Connacht and Munster, just become a tapped R, arra, as opposed to a rolled R, a broad rolled R, arra. Now, what you find at the start of a word is that, where'll I go with this? At the start of a word, of course, the start of a word in Irish, in Gaelic more broadly, can change depending on if certain words which cause mutation come before it. So historically, and this is where it gets complicated, the word for king, as I said, in Old Gaelic would have been ri, with this slender palatal trilled R. That's gone. Now, the word for his causes lenition, causes softening. So that means that the palatal trill, ri, would have become the softened form of that. So we go from the strong form to the weak form, and that's ri, his king, ri. That's not what tends to be said nowadays. You do find some speakers actually, especially in folk tales, where ri would be used in the vocative case when you're addressing the king, O king, ri. But what has generally happened is that people have just taken it that the slender R the slender strong R has become the broad strong R, and that all broad strong R's then just become weak broad R. So that's why in most dialect, or practically in all spoken Irish nowadays, you would just get a ri with a broad weak R, a ri. But there are distinctions made still by the best speakers in Donegal, or presumably in Ulster more broadly, when Gaelic was alive and well there. So the word for her causes what I would call aspiration, or basically devices a vowel. It doesn't affect consonants. So her king wouldn't affect the consonant, which means that historically that the slender R would stay strong, which would be ri, but because this slender strong R became broad strong R, you would get a distinction between ri, which means horking with this rolled broad R, ri, and ri with the tapped R, ri. But of course, in most dialects in Connacht and Munster, this strong broad R has just become a tap, ri, ri, and the same goes for the word their king. Now I'll push on because this is taking longer than I wanted. Interestingly, though, you do sometimes find that certain words. Sorry, if you're worrying about this is the current spelling, which is actually an exception. That normally, by the rules of the Caidán na Figiúil, that would be reduced to that. But you can't be looking for intelligence from the Caidán na Figiúil and consistency. This will be the first step of the spelling revolution, and when it's all over, that's what the word will look like. But anyway, so for example, reen is used in Kerry to mean tough, or someone's a bit thick, a bit reen, a bit dour. Now in let's say standard Gaelic or standard Irish, very reen then would be that on reen, where the R stays strong. This would cause lenition, but then because of the Dental's rule, or what I prefer to call and I have linguistic reasons for it, as well as it being funnier and easier to learn, STD no lenition, the STD no lenition rule. Basically, when there would be lenition, when these sounds, any of these two sounds, are beside each other, the lenition gets cancelled. So this would stay as a broad R. But in Munster, there's a rule that if a word ends in a compound word, so two words stuck together, as in Shan Van, old woman, if the first word of the compound ends in a sonorant, which is R, L, N, M, and NG, an extra vowel, what's called an epenthetic, which is just the Greek for inserted, an inserted extra vowel. An extra vowel is inserted. So Shanna Van, Anna, Reen, and that's the whole point. That now that there's a vowel there, this R is free to be lenited. And now, Anareen is more likely to be what duty nowadays, but there are attestations of Anareen in what this book, Phonètic du Parler du Guéry, by affectionately known as Mara Rancoch, French Mare, Marie Justet. Now, she says this in the book. I've translated it from French, from Parisian. The aspiration, or better, the softening of r to r, that is tapped R to broad tapped R to palatal slender tapped R, is found only in older subjects and tends to be lost. But the situation is a bit more complicated than that, because you do tend to find it among speakers. So, for example, there's a place, Béarra, And you might think that, there's a slender R, so at the beginning of a word, all slender R's have become broad R's, so that would just be pronounced nowadays as if it were baile ro, but baile ro is usually what's said. There's a few other words that you hear from people sometimes. The word roth, shape, roth, that often, or form, that often gets pronounced with the slender R, I've noticed. Roth. But I might come back and talk about that another time. I jot some notes in the description box. Is there any other? Well, a very common one actually is rugshe. For example, rugshe live. He grabbed me by the hand. Now, this is an interesting example because in this particular word, so basically what's happening here is that palatal R, or slender, weak R, is being taken as the lenited, the softened form of R. But at no stage in the history of this word was there a slender R at the start of it. You tend to hear this amongst the old speakers. But in this particular case, the R was never slender. It was broad. And in the past tense, you tend to have Lenition caused by a historical though, but in this particular word there wasn't a though there anyway. It's all very complicated. Ro'uk. But anyway, we won't get into that. So older speakers might say rugshe as opposed to rugshe, even though that a lot of people nowadays say veche with that verb. Anyway. Now, just to talk about the sounds of R when it comes in contact with other sounds. Is there anything here? Pro. If I think of a word when it's broad. Prompe. Your backside a hen's bogoilat or a prompe. When it's slender, the word for prince, prunes, again. This R tends to get devised, of course. If you're not a phonetician, that needn't worry you. Prunes. Then when that becomes lenited, and so on. There's nothing special there to talk about except maybe that MR. There used to be words in Old Irish, mrath, betrayal, whatever. All those words have become a BR, not to be confused with modern words where MN are basically any consonant that isn't S by N has become not S R. So, for example, Mona outside of Munster has become Mra, but not always actually in Roscommon, and even some certain speakers in Connacht would preserve the N in those instances. But anyway, is there anything here interesting worth talking about? SR is interesting. I'll say something about that in a second. Of course, you don't get LR at the start of a word, nor do you get RR at the start of a word, even though in Old Irish that was sometimes the way to show that the R wasn't being lenited by, so for example, that would be her king or their king, ri, because it wasn't being softened, whereas that might mean ri, his king. Now, is there anything I'm skipping there that I want to talk about? Really, any interesting behaviours? I suppose there's. Yeah, I won't get this done before midnight, but I'll ramble on anyway. What you tend to find with slender TR at the start of words nowadays in Kerry is that a lot of the usual pronunciation is chi. But certain people would actually still have the tapped R, tree. I suspect that this chi pronunciation with an unvoiced, do I have the shortcuts set up? would is probably under English influence because, of course, tree. Now I tend to say tree in English, a tree, not to be confused with trees. But anyway, but of course, most people would pronounce that in Ireland as tree, where the t is actually has this voiceless sh inserted anyway. and then this that devoiced tree. I suspect that's why this tree has become like that in modern Kerry Irish. Interestingly, of course, in Ossory Irish, which included all of practically all of modern County Kilkenny and the 3 western baronies of County Laois, Queen's County. I'm going to make a video about that for July and Chabáiste. Slender R, of course, became y, so that would be pronounced as chi. The only difference being the voicing. Although I suppose that would have been devoiced actually. Chi, tis. Yeah, it was. Yeah. Chi, ivij chi, number 3, or ij chi even, ij chi, which is very exotic because of course people aren't used to hearing Kilkenny Irish anymore, Ossory Irish. The same with dr, if I could think of a word, jeither is often said, jeither, the dregs of something, jeither and chrushkeen, as opposed to where the R would still be tapped, jeither. Now you do find, of course, that Slender R tends to be, it can be a fricative, so oed, kjoltoed, for example, oed, which is the tap, sorry, that's the tap, kjoltoed, oed, or it can be kjoltoed, kjoltoed, with a zh. It tends to get devoiced at the end of a word. Devoiced. Oh, appreciate the irony. And of course, the famous feature in Ossory Irish is that it became z, not z. That's the English ZH sound, if you like, as in regime, but the Ossory is z. The Irish, you do find that in speakers in West Kerry, Mayo, particularly. Now, another thing worth saying. Sorry, I'm definitely not going to get this finished before midnight. So, but I'll still keep flying ahead at the pace I'm going anyway. It is entertaining. I hope. This is when R follows these sounds. It might be worth a quick inversion there to see when R precedes those sounds. There are a few things worth saying. When R, actually, and I might as well, I'll talk about this in a later video as well, but I might as well fill out the details now. When you get a coronal sonorant, so basically these 3 sounds, R, L, N, followed by a voiced obstruent, so M, MH, B, BH, G, GH, and, exceptionally, which is not voiced, CH, this tends to get broken up. So for that's not arm, which is a very common mistake by learners who don't pronounce this as a tap. They pronounce it as the English continuant approximant arm, rather than orm. Film, which this epithetic vowel, farum, this tapped R. Now, there's no word that has R, MH in the middle of it that I can think of, as that's monosyllabic. It didn't come about. You'd have to have had a second syllable in the history of the language. But anyway, garab, a scar, or not a scar, a scab, tarov, garog. Again, this would only be in 2-syllable words. Drew, hook, originally dorga, but that became loads of different things in different dialects. And dorcha, not dorcha, but dorcha. The same with L, but we won't go into that. So that's one of the behaviours of R, and that goes for Slender R as well. So, for example, in the well, what's usually said actually, gedib, don the gedib or the plural of this, taidiv, with the Slender R, pronounced taidiv in Danish Irish, if I'm not mistaken, and other places actually, and so on. Or another word less common for darkness, but still said, Didehe. But anyway, now one very important behaviour of R is that here in the coronal or the tongue front column of consonants, that R becomes strong before. So even if it looks like a weak R, that would, in the history of the language, became strong R, orth, which again in most dialects became weak again. But just to write this out, because this is important. Now I usually do S first actually, and I'm going to say a bit about RS. Feck it, if I'd started this earlier now I would have got it done for midnight, but sure, look, at least I'm doing it. I hope this is recorded. Tis, right. RS. So for example, well, my whole point is that when you get R before a coronal sonorant, so a coronal consonant, so S, T, D, N, L, the R becomes strong in all those cases, which has some interesting ramifications. Because, for example, this word, if I take that the plural of door, so dorus is a door, but the plural is dorsche. That comes from the Old Irish dorsche. But anyway, now you might think that this R, it has this dummy slender vowel before it, so you think, that R is slender, but it's not, because an R before a coronal consonant, that is S, T, D, and L, first of all, became strong. So that R, still a slender, strong R, became strong. But of course, strong slender R, this sound, this palatal trill, became broad R. So that would have become, so the R would have become broad, whereas the S would have been slender. And then of course over time, this trilled R, except, well, yeah, there are still speakers that would say dorsche, and I would recommend actually that this distinction between strong R, broad, r, and weak R, tapped, broad, r, actually be taught to students. I think that's what intelligent means, that to be able to make distinctions interlego. I read the difference between things. I tell the difference between things. That's what intelligence is, etymologically speaking. The same, for example, with so board is a table. Board. The plural would be better spelt as that. Now, a few interesting things that are happening here. In Kerry, in Munster, that's pronounced boord. I know that there's parts in Connemara that's would pronounce it boord. But what's happening there is that that's becoming long before, well, so first of all, the R is becoming strong before the coronal, the tongue front consonant, and then before a tongue front consonant that's becoming long, although that has a certain irregularity that I won't go into. So for example, R, what would originally been ard, with a long D, became ard, and then because the A is in front of a strong R, a strong sonorant, not followed by a vowel, the vowel becomes long, and that's why it's pronounced as ord, as if there were a father, which you mistakenly see on road signs sometimes. But anyway, so what originally would have been boorst with this r, would have become broad R, where the R is broad, r, but the D is slender. Boord. Now, there are some speakers in Prosh de Moorch in West Kerry that I've heard this Slender R from, but it is very much on the way out. If those speakers haven't died in the meantime. But anyway, the same with this R. So, for example, Baile, what's spelled officially with the BH, because it comes from the word boidan, having to do with rock, but the locals understand it as having an MH. Moornuch is someone from Baile Vorne. So again, the R in this case is broad, but the N is slender. And if I could think of another one, can anyone? Well, even if you could, you couldn't help me. Well, you get the idea anyway at that stage. So that's an important point. A very common mistake, of course, and I hear it all the time, is, well, so first of all, people pronounce this as if it's the English word Bert in Ernie. This is an E in Irish, Bert, with an E vowel, not the centralised English. Well, that's the same as this. If I have it set up, I do. So it's not Bert or whatever way you pronounce it, but Bert. But the R is broad. Some people, in their effort to pronounce the Slender R, would say Bert, as in some learners would say Bert. But in this case, the R is actually broad because it's in front of a coronal, a tongue front consonant. Now, it is just midnight, but I'm going to push on. Now, a very interesting point about SR. I should actually say something interesting about RS. Sorry, I did. What am I? Did I? I did. This SR, first of all, in Ulster, and this is attested from Armagh and Louth and Tyrone, and it's in Scotland too. Well, actually, sorry, something I didn't mention. What's interesting is that in Scotland, this word orth tends to be pronounced as if there were an S there. Orst. But I'll come back and talk about that. Interestingly, Sean O'Donovan, in his Grammar of the Irish Language, page 36. I never took the... what did he say there? Sorry. R in the beginning of radical words, unmutated words, is always broad, whether the characteristic vowel of the word be broad or small or slender, he means, as a rua, red, ri, a king, reg, ready, olive being more common. To this rule, a few exceptions may be found in some parts of Ireland as riov, which you hear in West Kerry. A riov, they say in other dialects, but that the A there in that particular case isn't historical. Riov means ever before, actually, not ever. It's one of the mistakes I often hear. It means ever before. You can only use it in the past tense. And laicher for the present tense, and godio or chihe for the future tense. And anyway he finds the Slender also in rinche. He did. Actually, rinche is the way it was said in Ossory Irish, and in Tipperary Irish, yin is what's said in Munster, even though you often see it spelt as, sorry, I'm rambling now, and I was doing well, lads, I was doing well. You see it as yin, but actually what's usually said is yin, which is probably a confusion of yen and rinne, but that has a complicated history anyway, so we'll move on. But John O'Donovan makes this interesting point that, well, when he was doing this in the 1830s and 40s, that the Irish people at the time, as in the Irish speakers, found it very difficult to pronounce words like shrill, shrub, shrine, and what they would say is thrill, shrub, and shrine. There's a reason for that, and let's go back to what we were talking about with the strong R. So originally, if you had SR in Old Gaelic, that would have been, now because doesn't exist, this is going to be an effort to try and pronounce, in a word like this srian, not a rope, but can't think of the English word. Fuck it, doesn't matter. But reins, yes. So this would have been shrien, with this trilled palatal R, shrien. But what happened is that, as you know by now, the trilled palatal R, the strong, slender R, became broad. So that would have been something like shrien. But that's a bit of a peculiarity to get a slender sound next to a broad sound. So the S tended to be broadened as well, so that you got srien, and of course then that strong R, the roll, the trill, rrr, would have become and has become a tap, so that you'd hear srien. But, and this is where it gets complicated, in the lenited form of that, as in his srien, his reins, if that's thinking of the right word in English, the lenited S, I might write this actually with the old dot if it's clearer, the lenited S, the softened S, has become a H sound, and the softened R has become a slender tap. Sheehan. No, it can be a fricative as well, as I just pronounced it. This voiceless sound, Sheehan. So, in two different versions of the word, you would have had a slender, weak R, or a broad, strong R, which then in most dialects became a broad, weak R. So you tend to get an awful mix and match in dialects nowadays. And of course, so as John O'Donovan pointed out in the grammar of the Irish language, that the Irish people, the Irish speakers, found it difficult to say this, because really at that stage there was obviously no words that began with shr. There was only sr. Although all this is getting confused nowadays in the modern dialects, unless I'm misreading the historical situation, which is possible. I was wrong once before. I thought I was wrong, but I was actually right. But what's interesting is that English speakers in Ireland, the Ireland Saxons and the Ireland Saxonized, have the opposite problem. There's no word in English that begins with surah, and even the only example that you might think of is actually pronounced in the language of Sri Lanka as Shri, even though it's spelled SR. So you often get people pronouncing the nose as if it were English shron. There is, of course, no an English word that begins with SR, other than Sri Lanka, which is a sh. The same with sro. But to throw the whole cat, not bits of cat chopped up into bits, amongst the pigeons, SR in Ulster tends to have a retroflexive, retro meaning back, flexive meaning bend. So sh. So shrown, sh. And that has caused some confusion, I think. But well, who knows? It's complicated. Only alerting you to the idea, the thing that you do find native speakers nowadays saying shrown and shro. It is a complicated situation, but what I would recommend anyway is to go with the in a standardized form, not paying any attention to the Caidan of Figul, to go with the pronunciation of the historical consonant. Now, I might make one other point since I've jotted down some notes. This is an interesting point here. The word for again. So in the Caidan of Figul, that bad teachers teach to unwilling students, the word now, this is the whole point. You probably know that Gaelic spelling follows the rule of coil, lechan, lechan, slender with slender, broad with broad, which means that if you have e on one side of the consonant, you have to have e on the other side of the consonant, and if you have o on one side of the consonant, you have to have o on the other side of the consonant. But there are a whole group of adverbs that don't follow that rule. So this rule, for example, this is one of these adverbs that breaks the rule. You would think you would either expect a rish or a rish. The interesting thing is that you actually get both pronunciations. This is the spelling in Scotland nowadays at the moment. My spelling revolution will of course apply to Scottish spelling as well. So there's this hiatus or gap in the word. I don't like the word Seamus. You hear that nowadays used for hiatus. I would just call it a Bearra, or a gap, or Béarra if you're so inclined. Seamus actually comes from the word Sean, a sign, which was the gap, or if you had a gap in your teeth, that was called a Seamus because it was a sign of good luck. So a Seamus in a word has nothing to do with good luck. But anyway, but it comes from Old Irish. I won't go into the details of this, but this was actually declined for person. So like he came back would be a risische. She came back a frithische, and they came back a frithische, but that disappeared over time. But what's interesting is that, although it's not reflected in the spelling anymore, that word actually has a lenited, or I'll put it this way, it has a lenited F, if I spell it with the dot, and it has a lenited R. Now, as you know, lenited Slender R, so strong Slender R, this palatal trill, can't do it. Well, I can, but it's voiceless. I intended for it to be voiced, it doesn't matter. Became a tapped R, so rish, and that's still the pronunciation found in parts of Galway, parts of Mayo. You find it in Cork. There are other places as well. I'll fill in the notes in the description box. Now, well, if I go through this, that's basically what I've said there. But you find that the broad pronunciation in Kerry, for example, Wagner, when he was doing his linguistic atlas, or the Lassed linguistic atlas, what is it? I should know it. Survey of Irish dialects. He found a broad R in Tyrone, in Omagh or Omeath, I think it's pronounced in English. In northeast County Louth, he found the broad R in parts of Donegal and so on. You might be interested in the article by Martino Morhu, Or Coil Dus Focal. I think that's from the Festschrift for the most of all the can't remember now. But anyway, but basically, the spelling with the FH might actually be more sensible, because that explains why the R is slender in County Cork, in County Galway, in County Mayo, in Scotland, whereas this, for a number of reasons, is exceptional. I've made no note there, taking a dig at the current spelling. So in the classical spelling, look, sure, it doesn't matter. You can. I'll be coming back to this word anyway when I come back to my videos on spelling reform. But that's just an interesting point to note about the Slender R. So I'll stop it there, and I'm not too bad. It is now just 13 past midnight, so I'm not too late. And I hope that was of some use to you. Keep your questions coming. Au revoir, or as we say in New French in Kerry, au revoir.